The tradition at the beginning of each session of Parliament to commemorate former members of the House who have died. And it's only been 2 months since the last state opening, but in that time, sadly, we've lost our great friend Frank Dobson, former MP for Holborn and St Pancras. Frank was a very, very committed Health Secretary from 97 to 99, who began the rebuilding of our National Health Service after being so disgracefully run down by the Conservative government at that time. He was always an incredibly friendly face, always full of anecdotes and jokes that I can't repeat here, and he'll be greatly missed by all of us on this side of the House, and I suspect many others who knew him as a thoroughly decent Member of Parliament who was very committed to his constituents and to the cause of good housing across the country. We've also lost David Lambie at the magnificent age of 94. David was the Labour MP from 1970 to 1992, and I knew him very well as a very committed peace campaigner. On Tuesday, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister and I both remembered Saskia Jones and Jack Merritt, the wonderful young friends who died in the appalling terror attack in the Fishmongers' Hall. And it's right that, again, we pay tribute to them today for the way in which they lost their lives and the message they left behind. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all new members to the House, on both sides of the House, because being a Member of Parliament is a massive achievement, it's a massive honour, and I would have thought in witnessing our opening proceedings today, many must think, what on earth have I taken on? Is the pantomime season has come very early this year. But I think that, yeah, look behind you. If I may continue, Mr Speaker. And I would also like to pay tribute to those members who lost their seats in the general election, because to serve in Parliament and fight an election and then not be returned is an amazingly traumatic experience when they put such huge amount of work in to the campaign and the work that they've done. And the trauma they must all feel is something that I think everyone in this House should just think on for a moment, on the human side of what it is like to go through that experience. So I pay tribute to them and thank them all. I won't mention all the names, but one I want to particularly draw, well, if I could just commemorate and thank the amazing work and presence that Dennis Skinner has been in this Parliament through all the years that he was an MP. And, Mr Speaker, I would like to congratulate the proposer of the Loyal Address. The member for Chatham and Aylesford showed passion and integrity. And that's what she became known for since her very principled resignation from the government over its failure to restrict fixed odds betting terminals. And I thank her for that. But I'm afraid that, Mr Speaker, is where we part ways. For is anything that can drive a wedge between two people, even more than a Brexit vote in this place, it's the North London rivalry between Spurs and Arsenal. These things may seem trivial, but some, as the great Bill Shankly once said, put it this way: some people say football is a matter of life and death. I'm very disappointed in that attitude. It is much more important than that. And to put it another way, that'll help the honourable member, Arsenal won 13 league titles, Tottenham 2. But we take our victories where we can find them. But I do want also to compliment her, particularly on the last part of her speech dealing with the natural world and the environment. I think it was incredibly important and very well put. And can I also congratulate today's seconder of the Loyal Address, the member for Walsall North, for his speech and the spirit with which he gave that speech. I got a sense of the spirit of Walsall when I was in Walsall College recently. Wonderful place and wonderful students. Members opposite are renowned for their membership of various clubs. The Bullingdon Club, the Reform Club, and so on. There's many of those clubs. But I was absolutely overjoyed in researching the member to find that he is a member of one of the greatest and most prestigious clubs of them all. The honourable gentleman is a trustee of the Walsall Wood Allotment Charity, which is a fantastic honour. I'm sure everyone would agree. And he will understand more than most the ecstatic pleasure that we allotment holders, also the proposer, get from our allotments and the produce we get from them. So I hope this will provide an opportunity for a genuine bipartisan working relationship over the onions and the carrots. Mr. Speaker, it's just 2 months ago that the Prime Minister made the Queen come here in the rain as part of a pre-election stunt. Since then, he has made many promises to many different parts of the country. He has promised to address problems that are a result of his own party's actions in government and their political choice to impose austerity cuts on this country. There can no longer be any doubt that austerity has caused unnecessary suffering to millions of people all across this country. The communities to whom the Prime Minister made his promise will now judge him on whether he keeps them. In this Queen's speech, the government has tried to mimic some of the priorities and, interestingly, much of the language of Labour policies, but without the substance. On austerity, on investment, on regional inequality, on the National Health Service, we can see how we forced the terrain to shift. They say, Mr. Speaker, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, even if it's very pale imitation. But I fear that those who were swayed by the Prime Minister's promises will be sorely disappointed. As this Queen's speech shows, what the government is actually proposing is woefully inadequate for the scale of the problems that this country faces. Our NHS, the country's most precious institution, is on its knees due to this Tory government. The government now talks about enshrining the funding settlement in law. Enough of the gimmicks, just fund it properly. I don't remember the last Labour government having to pass a law to force itself to invest in the NHS. Yet it increased NHS funding by a rate of 6% per year. This government is proposing little more than half that, less in fact than the historical average. The gap between the government's rhetoric on the NHS and the reality is enormous. Last week, for the first time ever, every single major accident and emergency unit in England failed to hit its 4-hour waiting time target. Every major unit failed to meet the target. Every single one under this government. The number of people in England waiting for operations is the highest since records began, 4.4 million. And the number of unfilled staff vacancies has ballooned. The Prime Minister's promise of 50,000 extra nurses was quickly revealed as a sham. 19,000 of them already work for the NHS. And his promise of 40 new hospitals turned out to be a reconfiguration of just 6. Mr. Speaker, the public will remember this. They will not look kindly on promises that are not kept. This government says it will take action on hospital car parking fees, following our lead, but where we propose to abolish them, only apparently some people will be entitled to free parking under their plans. It was the disastrous Health and Social Care Act, brought in by the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats when they were in coalition, which flung open the door to privatisation, which is the cause of so many problems in our NHS. Yet the Queen's speech says nothing whatsoever about the Health and Social Care Act and the privatisation that it's brought. Not so long ago, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and announced he had a plan to solve the social care crisis. So where is it? It wasn't in his party's manifesto, and all we have today are empty words about bringing forward proposals. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. All we had in the last Queen's speech were empty words about bringing forward proposals. And in the Queen's speech before that, what do we get from the Conservatives? Empty words about bringing forward proposals. At least they've got continuity on this. Cuts to adult social care are expected to reach almost £8 billion by the end of 2019-20. But the government is only putting £1 billion back in. It's like taking £8 from someone and expecting them to be grateful when you give them back £1. So when it comes to So when it comes to young people, Mr. Speaker, the government seems to have just given up altogether. This is yet another Queen's speech that's miserably weak on education, nothing for early years, nothing for colleges, nothing for universities. The government clearly has not heard the anxious cry of parents and teachers about school funding, overcrowded and unqualified teachers. The funding promised for schools will still leave them hundreds of millions of pounds worse off in real terms than they were in 2010. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to Brexit, the election result demonstrated a strong determination from many people across our country to end the mess and paralysis of the last 3 years. We understand that people are desperate to move on. That does not mean we will just accept the Prime Minister's reckless approach on how it's done. He has now deliberately resurrected the threat of no deal at the end of next year, which would decimate industry and destroy people's jobs. That threat is now written into the withdrawal agreement bill. The Prime Minister has shown time and time again his priority